Ethan Carter had learned to measure time differently since the divorce. Days were no longer divided into work hours and rest, but into moments when his daughter Lily needed him and moments when he could afford to feel the weight of his own thoughts. At 34, he felt older than his years, not because life had been cruel, but because it had been quietly demanding. Every morning began the same way: packing Lily's lunch, tying her shoelaces, pretending not to notice the way she still looked over her shoulder as if afraid he might disappear too. Their small house on the edge of town was warm but modest, filled with secondhand furniture and carefully chosen routines. Ethan had learned that stability was built from repetition. Lily needed that. He needed it too. Christmas lights blinked outside neighboring houses, casting soft reflections through the windows, but inside, the season felt muted. Christmas had once been loud in this house. Now it was careful. Rachel Moore had not always been distant. When Ethan met her in his 20s, she was laughter and certainty, the kind of woman who spoke about the future as if it were already written. Their marriage began with shared plans and easy affection. For a long time, Ethan believed love was something you guarded by being loyal and present. He worked longer hours when Lily was born, convinced that providing was another language of devotion. The distance crept in slowly. Rachel's phone became an object she guarded. Conversations shortened. Silences lengthened. Ethan told himself it was stress, that new motherhood changed people, that patience was proof of love. It was Lily who noticed first, asking why mommy smiled at her phone more than at daddy. Ethan laughed it off then, but the question stayed with him. The truth revealed itself without drama. No shouting, no Schatterplatz. Just an evening when Rachel sat across from him at the kitchen table, hands folded too neatly, eyes already somewhere else. She admitted to an emotional affair with Daniel Moore, a coworker who listened to her complaints and made her feel understood. She insisted nothing physical had happened, as if that distinction softened the betrayal. Ethan felt something collapse inside him, not loudly, but completely. They divorced quietly. Rachel moved on quickly, chasing a version of happiness she believed she had missed. Ethan kept the house, the routines, and full custody of Lily. Friends praised him for being strong. He didn't feel strong. He felt emptied, like a man who had survived a storm only to find the landscape permanently altered. Years passed. Lily grew taller, wiser, more observant. She asked fewer questions about her mother and more about the world. Ethan learned to braid her hair badly and read bedtime stories well. Love, he discovered, could exist without romance, steady and resilient. Still, there were nights when the silence after Lily slept pressed too close. Christmas returned, as it always did, indifferent to personal histories. Lily counted days on a paper calendar taped to the fridge. She talked about Santa with cautious optimism, as if afraid to expect too much. Ethan promised himself he would make this Christmas gentle. No big expectations. No pretending that IT was Mrs. Helen Carter, his mother, who suggested the blind date. She said it casually over the phone, as if mentioning the weather. Ethan almost laughed. Dating felt like a language he had forgotten. He had become a father first, a man second. But Helen persisted, reminding him that loneliness was not a badge of honor and that Lily deserved to see her father happy. Ethan agreed more to end the conversation than from conviction. The event was a small Christmas gathering organized by a local community group, meant for people who believed the holidays were better shared. He told himself it was harmless. One evening, one conversation, nothing more done on the night of the event. Ethan stood in front of the mirror longer than he meant to, adjusting a sweater Lily had chosen because it made him look friendly. Snow had begun to fall, slow and deliberate, coating the streets in quiet. As he drove, memories pressed in, past Christmases with Rachel, laughter that no longer belonged to him. He pushed him aside. Tonight was about showing up, nothing else. The venue glowed with warm lights and artificial cheer. Laughter drifted through the room, punctuated by clinking glasses and familiar holiday music. Ethan felt immediately out of place, a single dad among couples and hopeful singles who seemed to know exactly how to perform this ritual. He reminded himself that leaving early was always an option. He didn't yet know that this evening would reopen wounds he thought had healed, or that it would quietly prepare him for something he hadn't allowed himself to imagine. For now, he was just a man standing at the edge of a room, holding on to the belief that showing up still mattered. As the snow thickened outside and the music swelled inside, Ethan took a breath and stepped forward, unaware that this Christmas would mark the beginning of a reckoning he could no longer avoid. Ethan Carter took a paper cup of coffee from the refreshment table and held it as if it gave him purpose. Around him, conversations rose and fell in gentle waves, people exchanging stories polished for first impressions. He listened more than he spoke, a habit formed by years of putting someone else's needs before his own. When a volunteer approached and mentioned that his blind date had arrived, Ethan felt a cautious tightening in his chest. The woman introduced to him was named Amanda Lewis. She had a practiced smile and eyes that moved quickly, scanning the room as if assessing options. They sat across from each other at a small table decorated with pine cones and a flickering candle. At first, the exchange was polite. They spoke about work, the cold weather, and how crowded the city felt during the holidays. Ethan answered carefully, trying not to sound rehearsed or guarded. Amanda asked why he had decided to attend the event. Ethan hesitated only a moment before answering honestly. He said he was a single father and thought it might be time to step back into the world. The words landed between them with unexpected weight. Amanda's expression shifted, subtle but unmistakable. Her smile tightened, and she nodded as if filing the information away. She asked about Lily, and Ethan spoke of his daughter with quiet pride, describing her curiosity and the way she insisted on reading signs out loud wherever they went. As he spoke, he realized how rarely he talked about Lily outside his small circle. Amanda listened, but her attention felt divided, her gaze drifting toward the room behind him. When Ethan finished, Amanda leaned back slightly. She said she admired parents who were devoted, but she admitted she was looking for something less complicated. She spoke gently, almost apologetically, as if careful wording could soften the message. Ethan nodded, forcing understanding into his expression. He told her he appreciated her honesty, though something in his chest ached with a familiarity he resented. The conversation dwindled after that. They exchanged a few more polite sentences, but the energy had shifted irreversibly. Amanda glanced at her phone, then suggested they both mingle and enjoy the rest of the evening. Ethan agreed, grateful for the escape. They parted with cordial smiles that meant nothing. Ethan moved toward the edge of the room, suddenly aware of how loud everything felt. Laughter brushed against him like static. He watched couples lean closer, hands brushing, voices lowering. A thought crept in uninvited. Perhaps this world was no longer meant for him. Being a father was not a flaw. Yet tonight, it had been treated like one that he stepped outside for air, the cold striking his face with clarity. Snow fell heavier now, each flake distinct under the streetlights. Ethan exhaled slowly, watching his breath dissolve. He thought of Lily at home, likely asleep with her favorite stuffed bear tucked under her chin. The idea that someone could see her as a complication unsettled him more than the rejection itself. Inside, the music swelled again, muffled by the closed door. Ethan considered leaving altogether. He had fulfilled his obligation simply by coming. No one would fault him for choosing comfort over exposure. Still, something held him there, not hope exactly, but a refusal to let one moment define him. He returned to the room, keeping to the perimeter. A volunteer offered him a cookie, and he accepted it with a small smile. He wondered if Rachel had ever felt this invisible during their marriage, or if she had always known there was another place she wanted to be. The thought was fleeting but sharp. Ethan found an empty chair near the window and sat, letting the evening pass without expectation. He wasn't waiting for anyone. He was waiting for the feeling to subside, the quiet sting that came from being seen and dismissed in the same breath. He reminded himself that this pain was not new. It was simply dressed in holiday lights. As the event began to thin and people collected coats and goodbyes, Ethan remained seated, watching the snowfall blur the world outside. He felt oddly calm, as if the worst had already happened and nothing more could be taken from him. He didn't know that someone across the room had noticed his stillness, or that this moment of quiet defeat was about to be interrupted. For now, Ethan allowed himself to sit with the truth of the evening. He had shown up. He had been honest. And even in rejection, he had not lost the part of himself that mattered most. Grace Williams had noticed Ethan Carter the moment the room seemed to move past him. While others clustered together in easy pairs, he sat alone by the window, hands folded loosely, gaze fixed on the falling snow as if it carried answers. There was no bitterness in his posture, only a quiet acceptance that intrigued her. She had learned, through experience, to recognize the difference. Grace hesitated before approaching. She was not searching for a grand gesture or a holiday miracle. She had come to the event out of something close to obligation, hoping proximity to others might dull the sharp edges of a year she would rather forget. Still, something about Ethan's stillness pulled her forward, as if silence itself had invited conversation. She asked if the seat across from him was taken. Ethan looked up, surprised, then shook his head. His smile was tentative but genuine, the kind that appeared only when it felt safe. Grace introduced herself, her voice calm, unhurried. She did not ask why he was alone. Instead, she commented on the snowfall, how it made the city feel briefly forgiven. They spoke without urgency. Grace learned that Ethan worked long hours but preferred evenings at home. He learned that Grace volunteered at a local literacy center and avoided crowds when she could. Their words circled each other carefully, neither pressing nor retreating. There was an ease in the conversation that neither of them named. Grace noticed the way Ethan paused before certain answers, as if weighing truth against vulnerability. When she asked about his family, he did not deflect. He told her about Lily, about how becoming a father had reshaped his understanding of responsibility and love. He did not mention the blind date that had ended poorly. He did not need to. Grace heard what mattered and what he chose to share. Grace listened closely. She had once been married too, long enough to know that betrayal did not always announce itself loudly. Her own marriage had ended after she discovered her husband's emotional attachment to another woman, a connection he dismissed until it became undeniable. The memory had taught her that honesty mattered more than appearances. She shared this with Ethan not to seek sympathy, but to explain the steadiness in her tone. Ethan absorbed her words quietly. He recognized something familiar in her story, a recognition that felt less like pain and more like understanding. For the first time that evening, he felt seen without being evaluated. The room around them thinned as people said their goodbyes. Chairs scraped softly against the floor. A volunteer dimmed the lights slightly, signaling the end of the event. Ethan realized he had lost track of time. Grace glanced at her watch and smiled, as if amused by the same realization. They stood together near the door, reluctant but unafraid of the pause between words. Grace adjusted her coat and then looked directly at Ethan, her expression open, unguarded. She said that she believed in clarity, that life was too fragile for assumptions. Ethan waited, unsure where the moment was leading. Grace took a breath. She said she was not asking for anything immediate, not romance dressed as urgency. She said she had spent too long rebuilding her life on honesty to pretend at indifference now. Then, with a softness that carried no demand, she asked him if he could imagine being her husband someday. The question did not feel sudden. It felt deliberate. Ethan's first instinct was disbelief, followed by a rush of caution. He thought of Lily, of the promises he had made to himself about protecting what mattered. He also thought of how little Grace knew him and how much she seemed to understand regardless. He did not answer right away. Instead, he thanked her for her honesty. Grace nodded, as if she expected nothing else. She said that answers could wait, that what mattered was the courage to ask the right questions. There was no disappointment in her voice, only patience. They stepped outside together into the cold. Snow muffled the city, turning familiar streets into something almost new. They stood a few feet apart, neither reaching for the other. Ethan felt something stir that he had long kept quiet. Not hope exactly, but possibility, As they parted ways, Grace told him she would like to see him again, in a place where conversations were not shaped by chance encounters. Ethan agreed, surprised by the steadiness in his own voice. He watched her walk away, her figure dissolving into the white night. Ethan drove home with the question echoing gently in his mind. He did not know what his answer would be, only that the evening had given him something he had not expected. Not a promise, but a reminder that life could still ask more of him than endurance. When he opened the door to his house, the quiet greeted him like an old companion. Ethan stood for a moment, listening to Lily's soft breathing from down the hall. He realized that whatever came next would require patience and care, but for the first time in a long while, he did not feel alone in considering it. Time slowed after that night, not because life had become lighter, but because Ethan Carter chose to move with care. He did not chase the feeling Grace Williams had stirred, nor did he dismiss it. Instead, he allowed it to exist alongside his responsibilities, observing it with the same attentiveness he gave to his daughter. Patience, he had learned, was not hesitation but respect. Grace and Ethan met again, this time in a quiet cafe where conversations unfolded without interruption. They spoke as two people who had been shaped by loss, but not defined by it. Grace never rushed him, never framed the future as a demand. Ethan noticed this immediately. It felt unfamiliar and reassuring at once. They shared ordinary details, discovering how comfort could grow from consistency. Lily entered Grace's awareness gradually. Ethan mentioned her often, not as a test, but as an extension of himself. Grace responded with interest rather than performance. When she finally met Lily, it was by chance, a brief encounter at the park where Grace knelt to Lily's level and spoke to her, as if she mattered. Lily later told Ethan that Grace had kind eyes, and he carried those words carefully. Rachel Moore appeared one afternoon without warning, standing on the porch with a hesitation that mirrored the past. She spoke of regret, of choices made under the illusion that happiness waited elsewhere. Ethan listened without interruption. He did not feel triumph or anger, only distance. He told her that forgiveness was not a return, that trust once broken required more than remorse to rebuild. Rachel left with quiet acceptance, carrying the weight of consequences she could no longer avoid. Grace never asked about Rachel directly, but she sensed the shift in Ethan after that encounter. When he told her, she listened without judgment. She understood that healing did not mean erasing the past, only placing it where it belonged. Their connection deepened not through grand declarations, but through mutual restraint and shared understanding. Winter softened into early spring. Ethan noticed the way Lily laughed more freely, how the house felt less careful and more alive. Grace became a presence without intrusion, respectful of boundaries, yet undeniably part of their rhythm. Love, Ethan realized, did not announce itself with certainty. It arrived quietly, asking to be trusted one evening. As Christmas lights were taken down across the neighborhood, Ethan stood in the living room watching Lily decorate a small tree they had decided to keep year-round. Grace sat nearby, reading, her presence blending into the space as if it had always belonged. The simplicity of the moment struck him with clarity. This was what he had been protecting, waiting for. Ethan did not propose with spectacle. He spoke to Grace after Lily had gone to bed, his voice steady but unadorned. He told her he could not promise perfection, only honesty and effort. He told her that being a husband meant choosing presence every day. Grace answered without hesitation. She said yes not because she needed certainty, but because she recognized truth. The next Christmas came quietly. Snow fell again, softer this time. Lily laughed as she placed a star atop the tree, Grace's hands steadying hers. Ethan watched them, aware that happiness was not the absence of pain, but the presence of trust. The past remained part of their story, but it no longer dictated the ending. As the lights glowed and the room filled with warmth, Ethan understood that love rebuilt after betrayal was not weaker, but deliberate. And in that deliberation, he found something stronger than hope, a life chosen honestly, one moment at a time.